So earlier this year, two of Britain's most powerful and, let's be honest, most secretive institutions went head-to-head in the High Court. You've got the Freemasons, a society that's been wrapped in mystery for centuries. And on the other side, the Metropolitan Police, the biggest police force in the country. This whole thing is a fascinating clash over privacy, suspicion, and what it even means to be a public servant today.
This right here is Freemasons Hall in London. I mean, it's a building that just screams history and discretion, right? The symbol of a quiet brotherhood. But pretty recently, this very building found itself at the absolute center of a legal firestorm, one that called into question the very idea of its secrecy.
Okay, so let's just get right to it. It's a headline you really don't expect to read, is it? A society that's famous for its secrecy is suddenly taking Britain's biggest police force to court. I mean, what on earth could make them step into the spotlight like that? Well, the answer comes down to a brand new and pretty controversial police policy. And let's not bury the lead here. The Freemasons lost. Big time. In February of 2026, a High Court judge just completely threw out their legal challenge. The ruling said the Met's new policy was totally legitimate and fair. This wasn't just the end of a court case. It basically set a whole new standard for transparency in British policing. So what exactly is this policy that caused all the drama? It all boils down to this thing called the Declarable Associations Policy. Sounds a bit dry, I know, but trust me, it's not. The Met Police decided it was time to update their rules, and when they did, they drew a line in the sand that put them on a direct collision course with the Freemasons. So here's the nuts and bolts of it. Met officers and staff now have to fess up if they're a member of any group that ticks three specific boxes. 1, it has a hierarchy. 2, its membership list is secret. And 3, its members are sworn to support and protect each other. Now, the policy was written pretty broadly, but let's be real, everyone knew who they were talking about. The Met even specifically named the Freemasons as a group that fits the bill. And wow, the effect was immediate. By the time this thing even got to the High Court, around 400 Met police and staff had already come forward and declared their memberships. And yep, you guessed it, the vast majority of them said they were Freemasons. So this wasn't just some theoretical debate. It was actively changing who knew what inside the police force. And you know, this wasn't just a decision made by a few people at the top. The Met actually asked its own staff what they thought, and the results were pretty overwhelming. Out of the 2,000 people who replied, about 2/3 said, yeah, being in groups like this really hurts public trust. And crucially, that exact same number, 2/3, said that Freemasonry should absolutely be included in this new policy. But you have to be asking, why now? I mean, this debate has been simmering for decades. Why did the Met suddenly decide to act? Well, the answer is tangled up in one of Britain's most infamous unsolved murders, a case that has cast this incredibly long and dark shadow over the police force for more than 30 years. Back in 1987, a private investigator named Daniel Morgan was found dead in a pub car park in London, with an axe in his head. The murder has never been solved, and for decades, his family has insisted that police corruption, potentially tied to Masonic networks right inside the force, completely sabotaged the investigation from day one. Then, in 2021, an independent panel released this absolutely devastating report on the case. Now, they didn't find a smoking gun, no definitive proof of a Masonic plot, but what they did do was coin this incredibly damaging term, institutional corruption. They used it to describe a culture where the Met Police cared more about protecting its own reputation than it did about finding justice for Daniel Morgan. In fact, that report is the whole reason we're talking about this policy today. Recommendation 14, right there in the report, was explicit. It said all officers should have to register their membership in any group that could raise questions about their impartiality, and it specifically named the Freemasons. So you see, the Met didn't just pull this policy out of thin air, it was a direct response to that report. But you really have to understand, this is not a new fight. Not at all. Worries about secret societies inside the justice system, well, they've been echoing through the halls of Parliament for a very, very long time. Just look at this timeline. You can see this constant push and pull. Way back in the late 90s, a parliamentary committee said, hey, we need public registers for police and judges who are Masons. But then, by 2009, that idea was scrapped for new judges because of human rights concerns. Then, bam, the Daniel Morgan report in 2021 brings the whole thing roaring back to life, which leads straight to the Met's policy and the court backing them up this year. It's just this cycle of concern, action, and then pushback over and over again. And just to give you an idea of what we were looking at back then, check out this data from 1998. During that first big wave of scrutiny, 5% of professional judges and 5% of magistrates came out and said they were Masons. Of course, a whole bunch of them either didn't reply or just refused to say, so the real number could have been even higher. The point is, the presence of Freemasons in the justice system has been a known thing for a long, long time.
All right, so let's get back to this year's big courtroom showdown, where this decades-long argument finally came to a head. And the arguments from both sides, well, they were powerful. They get right to the very heart of what we expect from people in public service. So on one side, you had the Freemasons' lawyers. They argued this policy was basically creating a blacklist, that it was an institutional signal of suspicion, and that it violated their human rights based on what they called prejudicial tropes. But the Met's lawyers fired back. They said, look, we're not responsible for the stigma around Freemasonry, but we are responsible for dealing with it to make sure the public trusts us. And the judge's final word was crystal clear. He said the policy serves a legitimate aim, that aim being to build public trust, and that it's a proportionate way to do it. Legally speaking, this was a total slam dunk for the police. It validated their whole argument that even the perception of bias is something they have to fight.
The Met's reaction came fast. Commander Simon Messenger put it bluntly. We have prioritized this over any organization's desire to maintain secrecy. It was basically a public statement saying, for us, transparency is now more important than privacy.
But hold on, that wasn't the end of it. The Metropolitan Police Federation, that's the union for the regular officers, came out swinging against their own boss's policy. Their general secretary called it unnecessary and wrong, and then he used that classic slippery slope argument. If it's Freemasons today, who's it going to be tomorrow? Golf clubs? The Scouts? It just shows you how divided the police force is on this. So when all the dust settles, what's the big takeaway here? Because this is about so much more than just one organization. It's really about a fundamental change in how we balance an individual's right to privacy against the public's right to know. So let's break it down. First, we now have a court ruling that says public perception, all by itself, can be a legal reason for forcing transparency. Second, it's incredible how a murder case from over 30 years ago is still driving major police reform today. Third, this ruling basically gives a green light for other police forces across the country to do the same thing. And finally, it pulls back the curtain on a deep, deep conflict right inside policing itself over this exact issue. When you boil it all down, this was never really just a story about the Freemasons. It's a story about the price of trust. It's a landmark moment in the never-ending battle for police reform, and it's actively redrawing the line of what we consider a public servant's duty. And that really leaves us with one final crucial question. In a time when our trust in institutions feels pretty shaky, for the people who hold all this power, where exactly does their right to a private life end and their duty of absolute transparency begin? Because that line has just been redrawn.